Hi, my name is Christy, and this podcast is my pursuit to glean practical wisdom on femininity, homemaking, finances, and relationships from the God-fearing women in my life. Hope you enjoy this journey with me as we learn to smile at the future. Now let's dive right in. Hello, ladies, and welcome to the Smiling at the Future podcast. It is a wonderful new year. 2021 is here, and I'm so thrilled to share that we have lots of great interviews coming down the line with wonderful, godly women that are full of wisdom and practical help. So I'm really excited to share all of those with you as we go along each month. And if you have been a faithful listener to this podcast, would you do me the great honor of rating and reviewing on Apple Podcasts? I actually just wrote my first review for another podcast that I have been loving and listening to every week for over 2 years. So please don't follow my example and wait that long to review this podcast, but go ahead and share your thoughts. Not only do I cherish these comments, but I know they will be instrumental in other people deciding to stick around and listen as well. The topic today is on how to rejoice with those who rejoice. I don't know about you, but it seems like weddings and showers, although they are wonderful and I love them dearly, they are also times when I feel my singleness most acutely. And so these are events that we really need to make sure we prepare our hearts and our minds so that we respond in a way that honors the Lord. We're going to also dive into the practical how-tos of being a guest at a wedding and also a bridesmaid. Today's conversation is with Lauren Hereford, who also has a podcast that you can check out called the Tulips and Honey Hub. I'll let her introduce herself a little more to you all. So here is our conversation. Lauren, it's a joy and an honor to have you on today. And I heard about you from the Women's Hope podcast, which is another like-minded women's podcast, and they recommended you. And so excited to talk about a topic that we all face, especially single women, and that is rejoicing with those who rejoice and learning how to do that well when we're going to weddings and showers. So, first of all, I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your podcast.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you having me on. It's just a tremendous privilege. I'm thankful for Women's Hope and for your wonderful podcast. I'm Lauren Hereford. I'm the host of the Tulips and Honey podcast. I have a podcasting channel, so there are other people who podcast on my channel throughout the week. So it's the Tulips and Honey Hub, where there's other people there. And I am a mom and a homeschooling stay-at-home mom and a wife. I became a believer in 2015. So I was a false convert for about a little over a decade. And on July 4th of 2015, I heard the gospel for the first time, the law and the gospel presented, and was graciously saved by God on that night. Been blogging, and I blogged for a couple of years after that, and then decided I needed to better use my time. I wasn't using it completely for the glory of God. So I looked for ways that I could use that extra time and be edifying and encouraging to the body of believers. So I started a podcast, and yeah, here we are.
What is kind of the main area of focus for you in your podcast?
Mostly we deal with theology, different issues. I try to have a lot of experts and guests on. I do a lot of interviews. There's a few episodes of just me dealing with specific topics, but mostly if there's great books and there's authors that I want to talk to a lot of pastors and a lot of theologians, teachers. I've gotten to interview some really wonderful men of God. I've gotten to interview folks from Answers in Genesis, Ray Comfort from Living Waters. I got to interview Costi Hinn and Justin Peters, Phil Johnson. So mostly interviews, and usually I try to direct those interviews towards specific topics of things that people might be confused about. So mostly Reformed theology and the different aspects therein.
Well, I'm going to hop right into the questions today, and we're going to do a good job meshing the really practical side of attending a wedding, being a part of a wedding, but also we're going to address the heart attitudes going into those settings so that you can be a blessing to the bride and groom, to the other guests, and hopefully steer clear of any bitterness or jealousy or anything that might be hiding in your heart when you're going to a wedding or a shower. The first question is a little more just lighthearted, but do you have any tips for how to enjoy a wedding if you don't have a date or if you're attending a wedding where you don't know many of the other guests?
Oh yeah, I thought this was great. So I'm an introvert. So I just naturally I struggle with being in groups of people, whether I know them or not. It tends to be kind of difficult. But I think the best way, if you're in a wedding where you don't know a lot of people, you don't have a date, you don't have a lot of focus here, if you can find some of the older guests, some of the guests that are maybe a little bit elderly, they're usually the ones that are not going to have a large group of people around them. So they might not be up and dancing. They might not be interacting quite as much as everybody else, but they will sit and talk with you, and you will never be like awkward and by yourself. If you can ingratiate yourself to some of the older guests, you might even learn quite a bit from those guests. So you can maybe find somebody like that. Or if you are seated in an area where there's somebody around you, try to get yourself out of your comfort zone. You can really change the tone for other people at weddings. Ask people how they know the couple, questions like that will really open it up. And then just try to focus on the details of the wedding as you're going through it. Try to enjoy exactly the little things that you're seeing, and hopefully that will help it not be quite so awkward, because it can be awkward to be in places like that without a lot of people that and you don't want to sit next to the bride and groom the whole time just sort of keeping their attention, because they're going to have like a million things going on at once. So finding other people who are maybe just sort of sitting back and not as engaged can help, or just engaging yourself and getting to know people. It's difficult, but you might find yourself having a better time if you really put yourself out there.
Yes. Last year for me, I really started thinking about this topic more because I had 4 weddings that I went to in a time span of 5 weeks. And
Wow.
so it was a lot. And a lot of the weddings, I didn't know hardly anybody other than the bride. And so I had to just walk in with, being purposeful with my mindset. I could choose to be fearful that, things would be awkward or I wouldn't have good conversations with people or have fun. And I had to really set my heart before attending. And I think one thing to be aware of too is usually at weddings, there's going to be a lot of unsaved family and friends at that event. What a way to bless the couple if you can be a means to share the gospel with them. And so be looking for people that you can talk about God's love and redemption and forgiveness with. I just can't think of a better gift that you could give that couple than telling them after the fact that you were able to share the gospel with one of their guests. Because more than likely, if they're a godly Christian couple, they have been praying for this person, trying to share the gospel with them. Maybe they've been very purposeful in their vows and in the ceremony, making the gospel clear because they want their guests to hear that. And if you can share that with them as well, it'll be easier for you because more than likely it'll be a stranger and you might never see that person again.
Right. Yeah. And it's harder to reach family members on your own. So it's always helpful to have friends come in and do that instead, because your family can sometimes not really want to listen to you, especially if you're younger, but they might listen to a friend. So that's such a great idea. I love that. That's why I always keep gospel tracks with me everywhere I go, just in case.
Yes. Yes. What mindset or attitude would you encourage ladies to think about and to set before they are walking into a wedding or a shower?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. And really, just to have that idea that you should set your mind before you head in is always a great idea. I think marriage is unique in that it's used throughout scripture to compare Christ's relationship with the church and God's relationship with Israel. As believers, it gives the idea of a wedding and marriage this extra emphasis. So we need to remember whenever we go into weddings or showers that it's another opportunity to glorify God through our behavior, through our actions. Like you said, getting to share the gospel and things to that nature. So if you can set your mind at the very beginning that in everything that we do, we need to consider how we can glorify God. It becomes especially difficult when we're faced with something that might be tough emotionally. But if we focus on that, on glorifying God in this moment, it can be easier to get through. So before heading in, setting that mindset that regardless of the emotions behind it, this is going to be glorifying to God. You can go in and actually be a blessing.
I love that. And sometimes in those settings, you can be very aware of your own lack of a relationship or you can focus on that instead of on rejoicing with the couple in their joy. And so just try and remove yourself from those thoughts. This couple's special gift from God, their relationship has nothing to do with the fact that you're still single. And so don't equate the two. Rejoice with them, share in their joy. I think that there's so many opportunities in life to weep with those who weep and very few to really lean into rejoicing with those who rejoice. And so I would say you should just grab those moments, make the most of them, share in their joy to the fullest. Yeah, think those thoughts, and it's such a huge day in somebody's life, and if it's a dear friend of yours, this is one of those big moments that you can really rejoice with them. And I wanna just, if I can, read a passage in scripture along these lines. It's in John chapter 3, verse 29. "The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him greatly rejoices at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease." And how it is such a picture of the gospel when you can rejoice with somebody else, when you can decrease and make the most of what God is doing in this couple's life, and how beautifully the gospel is showcased in marriage and at a wedding. Yeah, I think just keeping that scripture in mind, that was a very specific to this topic scripture that God allowed to be in his word, and we can apply it to bridesmaids and the bride and kind of switch the situation there. Okay, how can you avoid comparison to the bride?
I think this is really at the heart of how to rejoice with our bride, our friend that is getting married, rejoicing with their rejoicement. Because as women, we really do struggle not to compare ourselves with other women. I think this is important as believers to remember that our only comparison ought to be to Christ. Comparing ourselves with other ladies can be really discouraging. So it's something that we really have to watch our hearts for as women to make sure that we're not falling into that pattern of comparing ourselves to all these different ladies, because we're always going to see the best in other people and the worst in our own, our own lives, of picking at our own flaws and things to that nature. So it's better to really try to focus our attention on Christ, on what we can do at that moment, and to, instead of looking at the comparison, try to pinpoint things that we find about the bride that we love. That what is it that we love about this bride? What is about her personality? Things that we can praise her for. This dress is very modest. You look really beautiful in it. Thank you for, you know, being modest, or whatever it is, your makeup, whatever it is that we can think about, rather than, wow, I don't look that thin, or whatever it is, the comparisons that we have. Any way to take our minds off of that ditch that we can tend to fall into.
Or yeah, and you could probably, even some ladies might flip to the other side, the prideful side of comparison of,
Right.
how come she's getting married and I'm not married yet?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Which is just as sinful and just as heinous in the sight of God. But also, just to keep in mind, just because that woman is getting married before you does not mean that you will never get married. I think we can think those thoughts, and we don't know what the Lord has for our future. you very well could be in that same place yourself soon enough. And how would you want people to react and interact with you at your wedding? And what thoughts would you want them to be thinking about you? And so, going back to that principle, the scriptural principle, treating others as you want to be treated is really helpful to remember when you're at a wedding. Sometimes I guess this might be something I only think about, but I always want to, when it's my opportunity to greet the couple and they're going around to tables or whatever the case is, I always want to say something that is memorable and encouraging and uplifting to them. But usually what just comes out is, you look beautiful. I just say that kind of cliche phrase to the bride. I just was curious if you had any advice on what would be something you can say that is meaningful and encouraging in that moment.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question because it goes back to being prepared and really thinking about these things in advance before you go in. Because if you go in without thinking about these thoughts, you're going to find yourself kind of up a creek without a paddle, I guess is the expression. But I think the great the great way to look at this is there's the positive and the negative. And so make sure that you think through the things that you definitely don't want to say. There's a lot of times when people will give advice without being asked for advice, or they will maybe give, write things that are just not very helpful. And so there's actually some really beautiful verses in scripture about marriage that would be great to write in if there's a card. There's Mark 10:9. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Genesis 2:24 is another one that I thought of. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. But the most important thing that I think as believers that we can let one another know about is that we're praying for them and for their marriage and for their future. It's a scary thing to begin a family like that. I know it's for a man of God to know that he's now going to be responsible for his wife and he's going to be responsible for this family. And then for the woman who is now submitting herself to her husband and is going to be perhaps having children and things of that nature, letting them know in the cards that and then of course, genuinely praying for them because marriage is really, really hard. And I think that would be the most encouraging thing. I prayed for your marriage. I've been praying for this day. I've been praying for you today. I'm going to continue to pray for you. It's very encouraging to hear. And then also letting the bride know that she looks beautiful because I think every bride wants to hear that, even if it's cliche.
Yeah, yes, of course. I'm part of a Christian ladies Facebook group. So I actually threw this question out to them and got their ideas of in their weddings, what was most memorable, what stuck out to them from the comments they received from their guests. So I'm just going to read a few of those firsthand accounts from these ladies. One lady told her that on her wedding day, they said, "You said your vows loud and clear and with full confidence, and it made me rejoice that God had led you so clearly to this man." And she said she was normally very soft spoken, so that comment really meant a lot to her. Another thing you could say, and thanks for seating me so near so and so. It was a blessing. Usually, if there's assigned seats, the couple has thought through where to place each guest. And so you can thank them for who they seated you with. Another idea of what you could say, I can see how much you considered the comfort of your guests and love how your personalities and Godward priorities shine through the ceremony and the reception. And then this is kind of a funny comment, but may today be the day you love each other the least. And then another comment you could say, while excited for the wedding day, I'm even more excited for your marriage. And I like how Lauren, how you brought up continuing to pray for the couple, because that's true. This is just the start of their life together and they need prayer now more than ever. I have been blessed by both of your friendships, and I'm so excited to see how God is going to use you together. And then, just commenting on the specific wedding details, lots of thought and time have been put into those. And so pointing those out is always a blessing to the bride in particular. And then here's another funny one you could say is, Satan woke up this morning and must have said, "Oh crap." Well, that was hilarious.
That's funny.
And then, there's also things that you shouldn't say to the couple or that they would ever overhear that you said at their wedding. So some of those things would be, never say to the couple, when can we expect to meet the little one or the next little one or whatever, just
Oh, yes.
jumping right away into their family and how, the wedding day is a big enough event in their life, and to already be jumping the gun and trying to move forward in their minds. They're not necessarily thinking those thoughts right at that particular moment.
I was actually even asked if I was pregnant because there were people who didn't know why I was getting married. They just assumed I must have been pregnant to be getting married. So
Oh my goodness.
avoiding any talk of those subjects, yeah, is probably a good idea. That was actually not helpful at all for someone to ask me. And yeah, there's a lot of advice. And I think it was, I can't remember, maybe Lindsay Davis who said somebody had given her advice right before she was getting married, basically saying that they should enjoy all the time they have before they get married because it's all downhill from here or something like that. And those comments are never helpful.
Yeah, never say it's all downhill from here. That's a
Never.
big no-no. And then never make like comparison comments of like, "Oh, I would have done this differently at during my wedding," or, ever. And sometimes even if you don't tell that to the bride and groom, gossip travels so fast and that can get back to them. So just be very aware of your words and comments that you make at a wedding. Speaking of how to respond to comments, usually if you're single, sometimes you'll get some of those somewhat awkward comments like, "Why aren't you married?" or "Do you want to get married?" I think, once again, if you're prepared in how to respond to those, it's going to make that so much less awkward in the moment. And actually, just to whet your appetite for the listeners, we are going to do a whole episode on how to respond to awkward questions that singles receive. But we're going to get the ball rolling today. So, yeah, how would you either graciously or humorously respond if someone asks you, "Do you want to get married?"
Oh, yeah. I think this is really helpful. So, some advice that a pastor's wife gave a friend of mine that I've never forgotten is to just know that the question is coming and to have a response prepared and not to allow it to make you bitter. Because for this particular friend, she was struggling to have children and she was asking, all these people were saying, "Oh, well, are you maybe sinning?" Because it was a word of faith kind of situation. And so when she finally got into a solid church, the pastor's wife was like, "Just be prepared because the questions are going to come." So I think it's helpful to be prepared in advance for these kind of things because most people, they're not actually trying to be malicious when they ask these questions. They're just trying to maybe start up conversation. Maybe they're genuinely curious. So I always like to go for the humorous response. Anything kind of silly that you can use to take away the tension that you might feel about being asked those questions. But of course, I'm kind of a goofball. So when somebody says something like, "Do you want to get married?" My response would probably be like, "Nope, nope. Just kidding. Of course I do. Lord willing in the future." And then to redirect it, a great way to redirect that kind of situation is to ask, "How long have you been married? How did you and your spouse meet?" And if you can get somebody else talking about themselves and asking questions about their own personal life, it kind of helps to redirect the focus off of yourself. And it can also lead to, if this is an unsafe person, it can actually lead to an opportunity to share the gospel, like a segue into that. So I usually try to, my husband actually taught this to me because I'm very introverted. I have a hard time talking to people, but he works in the hospitals as a respiratory therapist. So his job is basically talking to people and finding out, what's going on. So he said, people love to have you ask questions about them. Most people don't want to share just random private information, but if you ask them questions about their families, their lives, they'll be excited to get to share that with you. And so you can kind of open people up to your conversation, get to know them better, and it takes the focus off of the topic you don't want to talk about.
Yeah. And I love how you said give the benefit of the doubt, because it is true that most people are just curious and they don't realize how a comment could maybe be hurtful. I think even just the example of a couple who's having trouble with having children and those comments of, "Do you want to have kids? Don't wait too long." And little do they know that those could potentially be very hurtful with a couple who is struggling with fertility. There's a quote that Spurgeon said, people who are very happy in the Lord are not apt either to give offense or to take offense. So don't let things feed on your insecurities. If someone asks, well, why aren't you married? You could be, maybe your own thoughts are already trending in those directions of like, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I married? Like those questions can land on a sensitive heart, but just realize that that person might not be asking that to mean any kind of offense. They care about you and they want to, that's a big detail in people's lives. So I think the humorous response can be good. Or if someone asks, why aren't you married? Or do you want to get married? You could just say, yes, I would love to be married if that's your heart's desire. And that could be as simple as that. And they'll be like, oh, okay, there's no underlying deep issue here that they have to talk you out of. Letting those comments roll off your back without taking them too seriously. I love how you said redirecting the question or focus back on the other person. Stay tuned for more. I have like probably 15 questions that singles get asked and how to respond to them that I'm so excited for. It's going to be a roundtable discussion with a couple other of my single friends. We have lots of creative answers.
That's going to be fun. I can't wait to hear that. Oh man, I'm such a fan of your podcast. I can't wait to listen to that episode because there's some awkward questions that people ask and they can be hard to answer for sure.
Yeah, but once again, if you're prepared, you won't feel awkward in the moment and you'll have an answer you can whip out and that'll help you navigate those tricky conversations. Okay, so is it ever okay to avoid a situation that you know is going to be emotionally difficult for you? Like a wedding or a shower, if you're just not feeling it, if you're feeling emotionally run down, is it ever okay to just not attend?
Well, I think this is a really fascinating question because, in one sense, we do want to avoid temptation, we want to avoid stumbling, but in the long run, if we are avoiding instead of working through those sort of difficult emotions and really trying to get to the bottom of what is happening there so that we can repent if there's sin in our hearts, we can ask God to help us, in these situations, we could end up actually missing something that's really important to somebody that we care about, somebody that we love, and they might look around and realize that you're not there. So for big events like wedding showers and weddings themselves, once they're over, you can't go back and fix that. So if you're struggling and you're having a really difficult time emotionally, you're not actually a part of the wedding. Because obviously, if you're like a bridesmaid or something, you do have to go. You can't sit that out. I would definitely suggest working through why it is that you're just not feeling like going and what's actually happening in your heart. We need to always be checking our heart. It is the most sinful of our members, the wretched wickedness of our hearts. We really have to be working through those emotions. And a lot of times for women, we are emotional creatures. We do tend to be more emotional than men. So it might be something that we have to address maybe more often than men do, just in general, as we have so many emotions. But avoiding them or ignoring them is just going to keep compacting them. So really working through, and I think a lot of this at its base level is the idea that somebody else is getting something that we deserve. I have to remind myself what it is that I actually deserve. And I don't deserve to even be invited. I don't deserve to breathe the air that I've been given. I don't deserve friendship and family and love. From the moment I sinned, I deserved God's wrath, but I've been given forgiveness and I've been given mercy, like Romans 9 tells us, God will have mercy on who he'll have mercy on. And so to bring it back to reminding myself what it is that I deserve and the grace and the forgiveness and the mercy that I've been given, it can help me in situations that are emotionally difficult. And that way I don't miss these big events that I most likely will regret missing in the long run. So refocusing that attitude, I think, is more important than missing the event.
And I would say too, I mean, because women are hormonal, that could be a factor that it's just a bad week for you. And next week you'll be in a right frame of mind and you would regret, if you had missed out. So I would say the pain of regret is much greater. And there are situations where there's going to be weddings that you attend where maybe you dated the groom at one point, or there's going to be some awkwardness. And I think in those situations, it's good to evaluate, if your presence is needed there.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
But for the most part, if they've invited you, especially during COVID year when the invite list is so small that if you get invited to a wedding, consider it a great privilege.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
Yes, yes. This next question, what encouragement would you have for women who have younger siblings getting married to help them avoid jealousy, to protect those relationships, and to help their sibling be the best spouse that they can be?
Oh, I love this question. I think the sibling rivalry is so intense. Unless there's a perfect family out there, then I think most of us have had at some point or another feeling of my sibling is more important than me, or maybe they've got a Christmas gift under the tree that I didn't get, or something of that nature. And so I think this is a great point, a great question to ask, and something to think of. I mean, we can go back to the same thought that what do we deserve? Should we be jealous that our sibling is getting something that we haven't had? Well, we know what we deserve. We can keep preaching the gospel to ourselves in these moments where we remind ourselves what we deserve and what we've been given. So the best thing for you to do is to remember that this family member, which we can often neglect our family and their emotions because we know that they're always going to be our family. They have to love us because they're related to us. So we do tend to neglect that. We don't put as much consideration or care into these relationships that are like just a given. So to remember that this is a sibling that we love, that we want the best for, that we prayed for, that we've, asked God to help in all of these different areas so that you don't wreck that relationship down the road. And the best advice I could give a woman to consider is that maybe one day you will have really cute nieces and nephews that you can play with and then send home. So you want to keep that relationship solid and golden because that's really fun when you can play with them and then send them back. It's really, really fun. And to really give that focus to that sibling for that day. That anyway, especially as family members, weddings are so stressful and difficult. Any way that you can be helping in those moments, help throughout the wedding, help on the way up to the wedding, alleviate some of that stress. And that'll take the focus off of the feelings that you might have. Really be praying about that in advance. Even if you have siblings and they're not dating and they're not married, still be praying in advance for that because if that happens, it might be difficult. But that day is already going to be difficult enough for your siblings. So helping in any way you can and making sure that you don't harm that relationship.
Yes. And it's such a landmark moment that if you do have bitterness in your heart or actions toward the sibling, they'll remember that and that will leave some permanent scars. So just really guard yourself against letting yourself say anything hurtful or letting your jealousy get the best of you. Yeah, I think just with siblings, the Lord has placed that person permanently in your life. We talked about this a little bit with being an aunt on a previous episode, but the Lord chooses who your family is. And my mom always told my siblings and I that your siblings are your built in friends and they'll be a lifelong friend. And so cultivating that friendship even now so that you can preserve and give those relationships the attention. And as an older sibling, you are going to have more wisdom to offer to your younger sibling. So just have a long view of that relationship. Look down the years. And if you're struggling with their marriage or them getting married now and that not being something that God has for you at this point, look down the years and just think of how this moment will impact the rest of your relationship and study passages on jealousy and memorize scripture and pray a lot. If this is something that's just that you're struggling with, take it to the Lord and ask Him to work in your heart so that you can just rejoice fully with them. This next question, A lot of ladies are going to be either a bridesmaid or a maid of honor in a wedding. And that just is a whole nother level of involvement in the whole wedding process. So I would love to hear if you have any ideas for our listeners of how they can be the best bridesmaid, maid of honor that they can be.
Yes, I have had the honor and privilege of getting to do those different bridesmaid and maid of honor. Some of the best advice that you can get is one, wear whatever dress they pick out for you. Don't give your opinion about the colors unless you're asked, because it is the bride's special day. And even if you're not particularly a big fan of the style, you don't want to add any extra stress to that. And I think what you mentioned about that long view of your relationship with this person is important to keep in mind, that the dress that you wear or the colors that they pick, they're not more important than your relationship with this person. So remember that when you are given this honor of being a part of the actual, what do they call that, bride party or something to that
The
nature?
bridal party. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it is an honor. They've picked you out of all the different people they could pick, but there's a lot of responsibilities that come with that. So if you're a person that's really, really busy and you're asked to do this and you don't actually have the time, it would be better for the bride if you let them know, I have, 8,000 things going on right now, and I want you to pick somebody that has the time to make this special for you, because there really is a lot that you do as the maid of honor or as a bridesmaid. There's, rehearsals and dress trying on and things to that nature. And so making sure that you're putting the bride first and that you're really glorifying God through your behavior, through your conversations. There could be people in the bridal party that are not saved that you can get the chance to talk to about God. You can get the chance to share the gospel with. And if your attitude throughout the whole time is such that you are rejoicing with your friend or your family member, you're going to be able to have that opportunity a lot better than if you fussed about the color of the dresses and stuff like that. So the best advice that I could give you is to make it about them and not be too picky about what you're asked to wear, unless it's inappropriate. I mean, if it's an inappropriate thing, then you definitely. But I mean, I had to put my hair in a bun. I do not have the forehead for buns. It looked really bad, but I didn't say anything, and
And if you look terrible, just think of it as another role you can play for the bride that she'll look better next to you. That's what I've thought
yes, that's right.
at weddings, because I've had a few where the hairstyle didn't turn out, the makeup didn't turn out, the dress didn't look great. But my thought was, well, the bride will look better, and that's okay. I don't have to look on this day. It's her day. Another thing, I think it's easy when you're part of a bridal party to kind of form a clique where you're kind of doing all these activities together. And so just be aware of the other people around you. Don't be too cliquish, reach out to others, encourage others, and also be aware of the financial investment of being a bridesmaid. I think if they're planning a bachelorette weekend away, I mean, that's expensive. The bridal shower, throwing a bridal shower is expensive. Usually you'll have to buy your own dress and shoes and sometimes pay for hair and makeup. And so just be aware if you're not financially able to commit to all those things. Yeah, once again, let the bride know that you can't be a part of their destination wedding in the Bahamas or whatever it is that they want you to do, that you love them, but you just can't financially commit to that. And usually they'll understand that reason. If you're a maid of honor, I think one of your biggest responsibilities and time that you can bless the bride is with the maid of honor speech. And I think a lot of people can put that off until like the night before, or just kind of like write a few things down on the back of a receipt and wing it. But I would encourage ladies to put thought into that, to make it short but meaningful. Share, maybe a few fun details, but really, I think putting the time into that is definitely worthwhile. Don't put it off to the last minute. Practice it too, because when you're nervous, which I guarantee you will be when you're standing in front of all those people, it's worth practicing. It's worth putting effort into. So I think that is a wonderful way to bless the bride and groom. Okay, so I wanted to touch on two controversial wedding topics here, and we're going to hopefully evaluate them from both sides of the equation because I know among Christian evangelicals there are people that fall on either side of the two topics we're going to discuss. So hopefully, whichever side of the line you're on, you'll have some wisdom to take away from the points we bring up. But the first thing I want to talk about is dancing at weddings. Maybe you're not comfortable dancing, maybe you are. So first we'll talk about if dancing is not something you're comfortable doing, maybe you have a conviction about it or maybe you're just not good at it and you don't want to showcase that to everybody at the wedding. What can you do during dancing to just make it a little bit less awkward so that you're not just kind of standing on the outside of the dance floor? Any recommendations you have for somebody in that position?
I think this is actually a great time to, if you're convicted about dancing or you perhaps notice some inappropriate dancing, to not be a part of that. You can actually take this time to take some photos of the bride, of the groom, of the details of their wedding, things that the bride and groom, it's such a whirlwind of a day. They're not going to be able to stop and take all these little pictures. And some of the best photos that people took for me were of the little ones, of little kiddos doing super cute things during weddings. Because there's not, you can't catch everything on camera, but if everybody is getting these little pictures, it really is a blessing down the road. And so if you really don't want to dance, that's a great moment to take some time to take some pictures and notice the details. And if the bride or groom need a refill on their drink or anything like that, that's a good time to offer to help with those things like that. And if you happen to notice some folks that are not dancing as well, you can maybe go and mingle a little bit, meet some folks that you don't know. And that's, of course, a great time to go over and like you mentioned at the beginning, share the gospel with their family members if you're a friend. So yeah, there's a lot of other options besides dancing if you're uncomfortable with that, because sometimes those dances are not appropriate. So I can understand. Or if you're just not comfortable with dancing altogether because you're like me and you have two left feet.
Yeah. Or, maybe you could go out and decorate the getaway car or do
There
something
you go.
else.
Yes.
So my recommendation is don't just sit and watch, try to find someone to talk to, do something else, and there's always opportunities for that. So let's say that someone has no problem joining the dance floor. Do you have any recommendations for how to wisely navigate that?
Oh, yeah. Definitely keep in mind how you're dressed so that you are aware of, the length of your outfit. I mean, you want to make sure that you watch out for other people's outfits as well, because the bride's dress is going to be, you don't want to step on anything like that. We do have people videoing these things, taking pictures. So we need to be careful about our own image, that we're being modest on the dance floor, which is something that apparently these days is not considered very often, unfortunately. So we do want to make sure that we take all those things into consideration. You can't do all the dances if you're in a dress. Some of the dances, I mean, it's been so long since I've seen dances, so I'm thinking like the crocodile and I don't know any of the modern dances, but I'm sure some of them should not be done in dresses. So yeah, just keeping those things in mind.
For whatever reason, whenever music comes on and the dance floor happens, it's not a time to break out every dance move you've ever seen done. And just I think probably something good to remember is try to be fun, but not sensual. Like you said, there's going to be cameras, and sometimes those pictures will be broadcast on social media. And what is your reputation going to look like if somebody sees you doing something inappropriate? So just be aware that those images will go beyond the context of that wedding. What might seem fun and fine in that setting to somebody else might look troublesome and might cause someone to stumble. So just be aware of what you look like. And also, if you're really not confident and you want to dance, it's okay to go and take some lessons and build confidence in that area so that you can feel like you can really have fun. I grew up in a family where we did not dance. And so I'm one of those people that I have no idea what I'm doing. So I do tend to stay off the dance floor because it's just better for everybody.
just too clumsy for it. I'm so clumsy. That's why my immediate thought was, I'm going to step on somebody's dress. It's going to be bad. Too clumsy for that. That's the only reason I would really avoid it is I don't want to hurt anybody else on accident.
Okay, so the next topic that is somewhat controversial is alcohol. So different convictions on that area. Do you have any guidance for how to use alcohol at a wedding for people who have convictions against it or don't have a conviction about it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that we would definitely want to keep in mind when we're at somebody else's wedding is that our convictions are, while they're very important to us, they don't necessarily have to be expressed in those moments. If you're at a wedding and there is alcohol, this has happened to me several times. We don't drink. I have family members that are alcoholics, and so we avoid drinking, even though it's not something that we would say that you necessarily can't. My opinion of that is that you cannot get drunk. That is definitely sinful in scripture. If you're at a wedding and there are other people partaking and it makes you uncomfortable, you can avoid those people. You can try to maybe mingle in other areas. But the worst thing that we can do in the middle of a wedding is go and voice our opinions about things like that right in the middle of it. There's so many things happening, and so for my husband's sake, anytime that we're at a wedding and people begin to partake a little too much, that's usually just our cue to go and wish the couple all the best and then head out. Because boy, some of those weddings go on until like 1 or 2 in the morning. I mean, it's impressive to me how long people can stay awake. I was exhausted after like an hour at our wedding. So it's, you don't have to stay for the entirety of the event, especially if you're not a member of the actual bridal party. So if people are partaking for a long period of time, it's okay to just not voice your opinion, but also head on out. There's a time and a place for opinions. And it's usually not when somebody is wearing a really, really big white poofy dress. I can tell you that it's really uncomfortable and awkward. I do remember where somebody brought us drinks and we just kind of set them aside. And there was one particular person that was a little bit more pushy and they kept pushing the drink back in front of us as if we needed to start drinking because they brought it all the way over there to us. And we just, politely said thank you and then kept setting it back aside. So it's okay to hold to your convictions, even if the people around you are frustrated with that. We do still need to be considering our convictions, without being boisterous.
I would just say, remember again that pictures and video usually go out to thousands and thousands of people on social media. If you think about everybody in a particular picture that gets tagged, so just be aware of your reputation and what that will look like when it's broadcast out like that. And really, our goal is to prefer those around us and the weaker brother. And so, being very sensitive and careful in those situations, I think you won't ever regret being careful with those choices. Do you have any last tips on just being a good wedding guest? Anything else you want to share? Maybe what to do, what not to do at a wedding?
For sure, I think some of the best advice that I could give for weddings is to use your time really wisely while you're there. Try not to get there late because you don't want to be that one person that's like walking in the middle of the ceremony or anything like that. So be respectful of their time. And this is actually a tremendous ceremony. Like this is a really important moment in somebody's life. Hopefully it'll be the only time they're having this moment in their life. And so really take it seriously and bring a little bit of levity into your thought process with that, but definitely make sure that you're redeeming the time. Everything is a wonderful opportunity to glorify God and to make him known to all of the people that you're around. And I love what you keep bringing it back to make sure that you're careful because there are going to be so many pictures taken and rumors do spread. So be careful what you do and what you say, like we would at any time, but even more so whenever we know there are a lot of people watching and listening.
I think another thing that can be easy to do at weddings is to gossip. So just really be careful what you say to other people. And then I had a lady tell me that somebody packed the bride and groom a ice chest of food and like put a CD together of like their favorite songs and had it in their getaway car. And she said that was so good because usually the bride and groom don't have a lot of time to eat at the reception or even that whole day. So they're famished by the time they get to their car. So, like, such a sweet gesture that you were thoughtful. So, that might be a way that you could bless the bride and groom. Also, you might think of bringing a change of clothes. Typically, the after the wedding and the tear down, sometimes that's not always figured out who's going to stick around and help. Don't flee the scene, just come, sit, enjoy, and then leave. Try to find ways you can be a blessing, change of clothes, help with the tear down afterwards, because sometimes that's the family that is doing that and they're pretty exhausted at that point also. So you can be a blessing to the family. And don't talk during the speeches. That's another thing. Give the attention. Don't be distracting to the other guests. And I would also say, just keep in mind, like, this is the bride and groom's big days. So if whatever traditions they've chosen to celebrate, whether it's the bouquet toss or whatever games they're doing, to just jump in and enjoy it and help raise the fun and energy at the wedding. I think there's nothing worse than a crowd that's less than enthusiastic about the festivities. And so you can jump in 2 feet, help raise the energy for other people, get other people to participate. Once again, a way to bless the bride and groom. They want to see that their guests are having a good time, and you can be a big part of that by your attitude and what you choose to participate in. And I've seen different people do that at weddings and been so impressed seeing how they just like have fun and enjoy it. And
It makes the day special for the bride and groom. Takes a little bit of pressure off them too. That's such a good point.
well, thank you so much, Lauren. So many practical tips for the ladies and for myself. And I can't wait to just store this away to when wedding season hits again. Maybe after COVID, we'll be attending more weddings again. And a lot of this information is going to be more relevant to our listeners. But I just really appreciate that you took the time. We've never met, and you graciously agreed to have this conversation with me. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I appreciate you inviting me. This has just been great. I love your podcast and I love all these questions. This is just a great way for people to grow in maturity and in grace. So I really appreciate you having me on.